KBB family, Tony Robbins back again. Listen, in this session, I'd like to talk to you about how to design a course or how to design a talk that will influence. Because when I'm doing a program, I'm not doing a program to just tell somebody something or teach them intellectually, because you can learn things and then your learning leads to knowledge and you become a fool. If your learning leads to action, as my friend Jim Rohn used to say, then you can do anything you want with your life. And so almost all the programs that I do, I'm thinking in terms of how do I influence someone to improve the quality of their life? And I think about what it is that I'm most passionate about that I want to communicate. But I'd like you to think about the structure a little bit. And I'm not expecting you to do this perfectly. This is a video you can watch several times. You come back to, kind of create a little workbook out of it for yourself. But I think, I rarely ever teach what it is I really do in the way that I design things. And as you probably know, I do programs that are anywhere from the shortest thing I ever do is like 4 or 5 hours. And most of my programs are either 4 days or up to 10 days. And I've got to keep audiences that are pretty large, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 this year. We've got an 85,000 person football field program that we're going to be doing. And I got to keep them enthralled. And most of these people wouldn't said for a 3-hour movie, somebody spent $300 million to make. And so in order to do that, you really have to understand who you're talking to. And I want to remind you that the two most important pieces of growing your business is to understand that everything is innovation and marketing, right? We've talked about this. And if you're going to innovate, that really means you're going to find a better way to meet the needs of your client. And marketing is getting them to want to do business with you. Well, when you're designing a talk, you still want to make sure that the talk itself is going to develop, or the seminar, the mastermind, whatever you're creating, that it's going to meet the needs of the individual people you're talking to this time. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing a 20,000 person event or I'm doing a, maybe 5,000-6,000 person event for 4 hours. I always go through this little process called Bend WIMP first. So I'm going to teach you two things. This little trigger I use called Bend WIMP. It's a little acronym of questions that I'm asking to get my mind geared up so that I'm prepared to really meet their needs and connect with them. And then I want to show you what I call the football field of influence. It's a simple little device I developed and worked with Jim Rohn on when I was working with him to be able to promote him. Because remember, I was a knowledge broker originally. Jim Rohn, if you don't know him, was a personal development speaker. He spoke for 3.5 hours at a time. And then he used to have once every year or so, he'd do a 2-day program. And that was the extent of it. It was the same program every time. And I wanted to make sure that every time we delivered, and I was the person filling those programs for him in those days. And we didn't have any of the technology we have today or the software, things like that. It was me helping out there, talking to groups, speaking to a Lions club, speaking to Qantas, speaking to a real estate office, a stock brokerage office, anybody that I thought in those days that by improving themselves, they could improve their income. And so they have an incentive to invest in themselves. That's kind of how I started out. But all the audiences I talked to were completely different demographics, psychographics. And today, now I work in 100 countries. So you can imagine when I go to Japan, it's a completely different psychology, a way of being. There's a different level of reverence and respect, the way of interacting, than if I go to China. In Japan, I have to, connect with people and know that saving face is the most important thing and make it okay for them to have their own individuality and be playful. In China, they literally put me in a place, the Mercedes-Benz Center there, and it's 10,000 people, and they have soldiers on every level of the building, and then they surround me with almost, it's not barbed wire, but literally a fence so that people can't come up because they just jump out and jump on top of each other. And first time I was there, the women would take out their high heels and stab my security guards to get closer. So you couldn't have more different cultures, and I got to serve them all. So how do I do that? Whether it's a corporate culture or it's one of my own seminars, if it's in Italy or Germany or Singapore or wherever the case may be, Abu Dhabi, I start with something called Bend WIMP, BENDWIMP, and all it is an acronym. And I think this is a useful thing. I want to know who my audience is. So think about this. If you're going to be successful in business, you have to know who's your ideal client. Like, if you want to influence somebody, you got to know what already influences them. Does that make sense? I'll say it again. To influence another human being, you got to know what already influences them. And everyone's different. We're all influenced by our emotions. We're all influenced by the state we're in. We're all influenced by our blueprints, our way of looking at life. And so I try to figure out a little bit about that audience. So even when I do, like I said, a 5,000 person mega event, it's only 3 or 4 hours, I send my team into the audience in advance, earlier in the day or the night before, and I have to interview at least 20 people. And I ask them, I'm asked a series of questions, and they send me that report, and I read it so that my mind is geared up so I can gear what I'm talking about. Even if I have a certain subject matter I know, I want to make it precisely to meet their needs. And that's how you over deliver. So whether, again, going to a place like China or Abu Dhabi, completely different environments, different beliefs, different rules, different customs. I got to know them all. But if I'm going to Ohio versus New York, right? Columbus, Ohio versus New York City versus San Francisco versus even LA, they're different cultures. So what does WIMP stand for? Real simple. First is I want to know, what do they believe? What are the things that are most important to them? What are they coming to this program for? What's the belief that got them to come here? Now, some people get sent to a corporate environment. Some people, qualified to go to some event. Some people raise their hand and said, I want to learn this subject. It depends on the group, but I want to know what their beliefs. Then I want to know, how are they going to evaluate what I'm sharing with them? Like, how do they make decisions about what things mean? What are they going to compare me to? So if I'm talking to, let's say, I'll give you an example at the end of this, a fun story. I'll say an NBA team, and I'm this white guy walking in who, doesn't play professional basketball. What's the first thing they're going to evaluate me is, why should I give this guy my time? Why am I sitting here talking to a guy that doesn't play basketball? And I got to be able to answer that question. I got to know what they believe about the team, what they believe about their chances of winning. Does that make sense? I need to know, Ben, what are their needs? What do they really need? Sometimes people don't know what they need, but my job is trying to figure out what that is. I need to know what their desires are. What do they want? Because, people want their desires met, but sometimes you meet your desires, you don't meet your needs. And my job is really over-deliver. And so I'm looking for, what do you want out of this program? Why'd you come here? And when we interview people in advance, we try to find that out. Or I'll have to try to generalize a little bit about the culture by talking to people, finding out what's the economy like right now. And that leads to the W, which is, what are the wounds? Everybody has wounds. And if you can heal a wound, the old metaphor about, they pulling the needle out of the lion's paw and now the lion becomes your buddy. Well, everybody has wounds. Everybody has something that's not where they want it to be. And what I try to do is heal wounds as much as I can. But wounds also provide you leverage, as I'll explain, to get them to pay attention. If you can talk about something that they're hurting about, you're going to pull their interest in. Not if you make them wrong for it, but if you just say, look, I've had this problem. I don't know if you have, and you mentioned the wounds, you're going to create a connection or rapport with them. Then for the rest of WIMP, what are their interests? What are they most interested in? Why are they coming here? What's this about? So I can hopefully address some aspect. And you're going to address all these things, but it's a way of orienting your mind. So when you're thinking about how to meet somebody's needs, you do an extraordinary job. The M is, really, who are their role models? Like, who do they look up to? Who do they respect? So if I'm doing a corporate training and I got 5,000, 10,000 people, 3,000 people, whatever, it's for a big corporation, and they bring me in, and let's say it's a training for all their top marketing or sales people. I will go in and I will interview people, but I'll also ask, I want to talk to your top 3 or top 5 salespeople, marketers, whatever the top people are in that group. And before I get on stage, an hour in advance, I'll go and I'll sit down with these people, 30, 40 minutes, take 10 or 15 minutes, 5, 10 minutes with each person. And I'll just say, listen, I get homework on them too. And I said, listen, I understand you're number 1 at this or number 2 at this, and you've been in the company this long. Tell me, what do you think it is that you do different than anybody else? What makes you more successful than anybody else? So that when I get up and give the talk, it's not some canned talk. Yes, I have certain things I know everybody needs, but then I can say, I was talking backstage, I wanted to meet with your top people in advance to find out what they think you need to learn or what they think sets them apart. And then I quote them directly. And almost always, since I know the principles that cause people to succeed, they dovetail. But I'm able to use their examples. And oh my God, the social proof of using their role models, people lean in and they're like, wow, that's what it is. And also I'm acknowledging the person in the room and they brighten up as well. And it's sincere. There's no bullshit to it. And then what are they proud of? I want to know what they're hurting, what's not working, and I want to know what is working. So I can acknowledge that, because when you acknowledge sincerely things that people are proud about and you can connect to them that way, it bonds you to them. So this is kind of just a general format that I try to do. Now, you may not be able to interview everybody in advance. You may not know all this about them. But what I'm doing also is I'm studying, let's say, that industry or the norms of that culture. Or during the talk, I'm gathering information sometime to understand more of what they need, want, and when I'm adapting accordingly. So this bend WIMP thing it's not literal, like you got to know everything, but it's like my checklist of things I'm asking about. And the more you know about what's influencing a person, what they believe, again, how they evaluate, make sense of things, what they're going to compare you to, what their needs are, what their desires are, what their wounds are, what their interests are, who their role models are, and what they're proud of, man, you got a big jump on being able to connect with that audience and build a real deep rapport. Does that make sense? Now, I know that's just a simple acronym, and now let me kind of show you a little diagram. It seems a little complex, but it's pretty simple.